Three slow knocks echoed through my house just after midnight. I thought it was kids playing a prank until I opened the front door. No one was there. Instead, a tiny wicker basket sat on my porch with a newborn baby crying so softly he barely had the strength to move. Wrapped around him was an old blue blanket, and tucked inside was a single note that read, "Please don't try to find me. Just love him." My wife Margaret rushed to the door, picked the baby up without hesitation, and held him close to keep him warm. We called the police immediately, but despite weeks of searching, no one came forward to claim him. Months later, the court allowed us to adopt him, and we named him Daniel. From that day on, he was never our adopted son. He was simply our son. We watched him take his first steps, graduate from college, get married, and become a wonderful father himself. Even after Margaret passed away 6 years ago, Daniel never stopped calling me every Sunday morning just to ask, "How are you doing, Dad?" I truly believe the mystery of that winter night had died forever. Until yesterday. Exactly 42 years later, I heard the same three slow knocks on my front door. When I opened it, an elderly woman stood there holding the very same faded blue baby blanket I had kept hidden all these years. She looked me straight in the eyes, took a shaky breath, and whispered, "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I came because my son is in terrible danger." I stared at the woman for several seconds without saying a single word. My hands began to shake as I looked from her face to the faded blue blanket she was holding. There was no way she could have that blanket unless she had been there 42 years ago. Before I could ask a question, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small silver bracelet. My heart nearly stopped. I had placed that bracelet around the baby's tiny wrist the day we officially adopted him because Margaret wanted him to have something from his first day with us. No one else knew it existed. The woman whispered, "His real name was never Daniel." I immediately stepped in front of my doorway. "After 42 years, you don't get to call him anything except my son." Tears rolled down her face as she quietly nodded. "You're right. You earned that." She explained that she had stayed away because powerful people were searching for the baby the night she left him with us. She believed abandoning him was the only way to keep him alive. For 42 years, she had watched from a distance, making sure he was safe, but she had never dared to come close. Yesterday morning, everything changed. She had seen two strangers following Daniel after he left work. They were asking questions, showing old photographs, and searching for a man born on the exact night Daniel had been left on my doorstep. I wanted to believe she was lying, but before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice was unusually nervous. "Dad, two men have been sitting outside my house since this morning, and I think they're following me." I told Daniel to lock every door, keep his family inside, and wait for me. Then I grabbed my car keys, but before I could leave, the elderly woman stopped me. She pulled an old photograph from her coat pocket. It showed a young woman holding a newborn baby in the hospital. Standing beside her was a man whose face had been torn away from the picture. On the back, one sentence was written in faded ink: "If they ever find him, they will finish what they started." I looked at her in disbelief. She finally told me the truth she had carried for 42 years. Daniel was not abandoned because he was unwanted. He was abandoned because someone was trying to kill him. His biological father had uncovered a powerful financial crime involving several influential businessmen, and before he could expose them, he disappeared without a trace. Days later, those same people began searching for the baby, believing he possessed something his father had hidden before vanishing. She had left Daniel on my doorstep because my wife and I lived hundreds of miles away, where no one knew us. She thought he would disappear forever into an ordinary family. For 42 years, her plan worked. Until now. Just then, Daniel called again, this time whispering, "Dad, they're at my front door." And one of them just said they know who I really am. By the time I reached Daniel's house, two black SUVs were parked across the street, but the men were gone. Daniel opened the door with his wife and two children standing behind him, terrified. Before I could say anything, the elderly woman walked past me, looked straight at Daniel, and quietly whispered, "I'm sorry." Daniel frowned, not understanding who she was. She handed him the old hospital photograph and pointed to the newborn in her arms. "That's you." The room fell silent. Daniel looked at me with tears filling his eyes, then back at the woman. "Are you saying you're my mother?" She nodded, unable to speak. Before anyone could process the moment, someone began pounding on the front door. Not knocking, pounding. A deep voice shouted, "Daniel, we know you're inside. Open the door and no one gets hurt." My grandson started crying as Daniel instinctively stepped in front of his family. I picked up the phone to call the police, but the line was dead. Then my eyes fell on the old photograph still lying on the table. As it slipped from Daniel's hands, something hidden inside the torn edge slid onto the floor. A tiny brass key taped beneath the picture. The elderly woman gasped and whispered, "Oh no, that's what they've been searching for all these years." The pounding on the front door grew louder with every passing second. I grabbed the tiny brass key before anyone else could touch it and slipped it into my pocket. The elderly woman looked at me with panic in her eyes. "William, don't let them have that key. Daniel's father died protecting it." Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "A key? To what?" She took a shaky breath. "Before your father disappeared, he hid evidence that could destroy every man involved in the biggest financial fraud our state had ever seen. He locked everything inside a safety deposit box and left only one key behind. Those men have spent 42 years searching for it because they know what's inside could send them to prison for the rest of their lives." Just then, the front window shattered as a brick crashed into the living room. Daniel's children screamed. I immediately rushed everyone toward the back of the house while dialing 911 from my cell phone. This time the call went through. As sirens echoed faintly in the distance, the black SUVs sped away before the police arrived. The officers searched the neighborhood but found nothing. Later that evening, one detective examined the brass key and quietly asked, "Mr. Harper, do you know which bank this belongs to?" Before I could answer, the elderly woman whispered 3 words that made every officer in the room turn toward her. "Liberty National Bank." The detective's face changed instantly. That vault was permanently sealed 42 years ago, and no one has been allowed inside since. The next morning, Daniel, the elderly woman, my attorney, and I stood outside Liberty National Bank, staring at a vault that had remained sealed for 42 years. The bank manager unlocked the old records and confirmed something none of us expected. "This safety deposit box can only be opened if both the original key and the owner's final authorization are presented." My heart sank. "The owner disappeared decades ago," I replied. The manager quietly nodded before pulling a yellowed envelope from the archive. "Not exactly. He left one final authorization, with instructions that it could only be released if someone arrived carrying this key." Every eye in the room turned toward me as I unfolded the document. At the bottom was the signature of Daniel's biological father. It read, "If my son is alive, everything inside belongs to him. If I am gone, tell him I never abandoned him. I died trying to protect him." Daniel's hands began shaking as tears filled his eyes. Before anyone could speak, the heavy vault door slowly opened. Inside the small metal box were several old files, a bundle of photographs, and dozens of cassette tapes. My attorney picked up the first file, and her face instantly turned pale. "William, this isn't just evidence of fraud." She looked at Daniel before finishing her sentence. "These documents identify every person who ordered your father's murder, and at least 2 of them are still alive today." Daniel could barely breathe as he stared at the files spread across the table. For 42 years he had believed he was an abandoned child. Now he had learned that his father had died trying to save his life. My attorney immediately handed every document to the detectives waiting outside the vault. Within hours, arrest warrants were issued, and by sunset, 2 elderly businessmen were taken into custody. News channels across the country called it the oldest solved financial murder conspiracy in state history. Reporters surrounded Daniel, asking whether he finally wanted to know the truth about his biological family. He looked at the cameras for a moment, then quietly walked over to me. Placing one hand on my shoulder, he smiled through tears and said, "The truth is, I already know who my father is." Every microphone turned toward him as he continued, "The man who gave me life died before I could meet him. But the man who taught me how to walk, how to work, how to love my family, and how to become a good father has been standing beside me for 42 years. Then he wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "You were never my adoptive father. You have always been my dad." Even the reporters lowered their cameras. The elderly woman stood a few feet away, crying quietly. Daniel walked over to her, gently took her hand and said, "You gave me life, and he gave me a future. I don't have to choose between you. Today, I found my entire family." As we walked out of the courthouse together, I looked up at the sky and thought about the tiny basket left on my doorstep 42 years earlier. I realized that the greatest gift ever left outside my front door had never been a mystery. It had been my son.